My guest on the podcast today is the one and only Tim Don. Tim has been involved in triathlon since his early teens and has progressed through the sport at almost as fast a pace as he finishes Ironman races as a pro. By the time he was 14, he had represented Great Britain internationally at a youth level, and well, the rest is history. He turned professional in 1997 and is still racing professionally today and loving it just as much as he did way back then. He's raced everything from the Super Sprint Arena Games right up to X-Tri events and everything in between, from swim run races, adventure racing, team racing, relays, you name it, he's given it a go. He's also lived on 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and North America, following the dream of that perfect race and an endless summer to get the most out of his training. But he now sees himself as more of a custodian of the sport. It's given him so much beyond his wildest dreams, the adventures, the friendships, life experiences, self-belief in pushing his body and mind, the wins, and the broken bones. And now he wants to pass on all of his knowledge and experience that he's gained on his journey with everyone through something that he's calling Halo ID. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I know once we start talking together, you're going to see that infectiousness that he has, that affinity he has for the sport. It comes out every time he speaks. And I know many people know him as the man in the halo, but I am thrilled to have him here on the TriDoc podcast with me. Tim Don, thank you so much for taking some time and joining me today.
Introduction.
Well, it's not nearly as long as it could have been because you really have had an incredible career in the sport, and I love watching interviews with you, and that's why I've been so excited to speak with you, because your enthusiasm for triathlon comes out every step of the way. So why don't we begin? Maybe you could just tell me a little bit about your history in the sport. I mean, you started at a really young age and found success pretty much immediately.
Well, I don't know about that, but no, I was so fortunate. I think I was born and raised in West Philadelphia. No, I was born and raised in West London, and you know how I found triathlon was through one of my local swimming pools that had a triathlon club there, and it was quite an active triathlon club. Lots of amateurs, but there was this one guy who was pretty good there called Spencer Smith, who at the time was the ITU, I think it's World Triathlon now, world champion for the professionals. So, you know, kind of like, I was like, oh, wow, this looks quite cool. So, yeah, I got into it through him. So, but it was always a bit different. I swam and ran, you know, quite competitively, but I was always very competitive when I was younger. And I was probably only the 3rd best runner at my school. And I was probably only the 4th best runner in the county, so like in the state in America, but I was probably top 10 in the country. I was just unfortunate or fortunate enough that 2 of my great friends, Sam and Ben, who went to my school, were international runners. And then there was another lad called Mo Farah, who I trained with twice a week at the local running track when we were teenagers. So as much as it was great company, I realised quite early on I was not going to make it as a runner because these guys were far much faster than me. Sorry.
Yeah, not too many people can say they had the opportunity to train with Mo Farah, so that had to have an impact.
Oh, massively. But I think at that age, Mo wasn't the Mo you see today. He was an amazing runner, but he wasn't the finished article. He was just a young kid who was a good runner, and we were all good runners, you know, in this run group at Hounslow Running Club, and we just wanted to have fun and go fast. But definitely, when I look back, you know, when I read his book, and there's a you know a picture of myself, Sam, and Ben running, and he's on his bike next to us because he was too young, because he was obviously a few years younger than me. He's riding his bike next to us, and we're just like, you know. But I mean, again, it was I could bore you to death about distance running. But, you know, there was a guy called Richard Narurka who was I think, don't forget this is in the mid-90s, he was a 2:07 marathon runner. He was just another guy that used to hang out in the local park. Daniel Coleman, the first Kenyan or the first athlete to go under 8 minutes for 2 miles. He used to train in the park, which is my local park. So it really was a hotbed of middle and long distance runners. So that was the heritage that through Bushy Park, the London Marathon, the guys that set that up, they were from the same town as myself. So It was really endurance. And then there was this local triathlon club, and that was even relatively unique because it was an open air swimming pool in London that was open 365 days of the year, no come rain or shine. And there wasn't much shine, and there was lots of rain.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, that's they say that the people you are around have such an impact. I mean, clearly you have to have the talent yourself, and obviously you congregate the people with talent together. But if you're just all around each other, you've got to be pushing each other, and clearly that paid off for all of you. So that's pretty amazing. Did you mention several other people besides Mo Farah? Did any of them achieve greatness in their individual sports as well? I mean,
Absolutely.
You mentioned the sub 8 minute 2 miler, obviously, but you mentioned some others that I don't recognize their names.
Yeah, so Ben Whitby, he went on to the Commonwealth Games to represent England.
Yep.
He's run 61 for a half marathon. Sam was European champion for 5,000 meters as a junior. We went to school together. Unfortunately, he died in a car crash when I was quite young, when we were 23, when we were training in South Africa. But up until that age, he had won medals. He'd been British cross-country champion a few times, and he'd got many international honours. And yeah, obviously Spencer Smith, the triathlete, he won ITU World Championships twice, and then he got fourth at Kona overall in the professionals as well. And he now lives in upstate New York, actually. He's got a coaching company up there. You got to Google him. He is larger than life. Some of the photos.
I will.
Yeah, he's amazing athlete. With Simon Lessing, there were two British athletes. Simon Lessing was very prim and proper, half South African, private school educated. Well, Spencer Smith was a real Londoner. His dad was a Barrow boy, a bit of a wheeler dealer. His dad always had a big cigar, and these guys just like clashed, but in a very, I guess, poetic way. When they raced, they're totally contrasting styles. Yes, it's a brilliant era to be brought up in British triathlon.
Now, you obviously excelled in running. At what point did you decide that you're going to try this triathlon stuff?
I was about 13, and I was training I wanted to be a qualified lifeguard, so I was doing some basic courses, and I saw this triathlon club. And in England, or Great Britain, sorry, we have what we call bank holiday Mondays. So we have 5 Mondays throughout the year where we have a public holiday. And this local swimming pool, on all of these, they organised a local triathlon. It was a 400-metre pool swim. It was 2 10-kilometre laps on the bike, 20 kilometres, and then a 5-kilometre run. You ran from the swimming pool to Hampton Court Palace, did a U-turn, and then came back. And one Sunday or Saturday, I was doing my lifeguard, my basic training as a young want-to-be lifeguard. And they said they had some spare entries the next day. I used to ride everywhere because I couldn't drive, and it's the best form of transport to get from A to B in London. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I did it, and I did absolutely shockingly, but I really enjoyed it. It just was a bit peculiar, a bit weird, kind of going swimming, biking, and running. And the swimming pool, you'd swim down one side of the lane rope, then down the other, then you tumble turn, push under the lane rope, so you kind of zigzag the pool, and then every 10 seconds they'd start. So it was the original rolling start. Ironman weren't the first, and it was literally, you did this, you jumped on the bike, and it was. I just really, really enjoyed it. And then the club coach was a guy called Graham Fletcher, and he was obviously there. He came up to me afterwards and he goes, "Oh, you're quite good at this." And I'm like, "Really?" I'm terrible. And he goes, "Well, how many triathlons have you done?" I said, "Oh, no, that was my first." He said, "Well, why don't you come down to the club session?" And I'd swam at that age up, quite a lot. I was swimming, probably 5 times a week. And he took me under his wing and he started to coach me. And he coached me right through my first junior world title, right through to Sydney Olympics, and 2 years after that as well. So it was a great relationship. My local club coach taking me all that way because he saw me doing a local triathlon.
That is pretty awesome. So as you look back through such an amazing career, Olympics, Ironman World Championships, I mean, just on and on it goes. What do you think back on as some of your real defining highlights, the things that you think back on as sort of the more fond memories?
I think when I was younger, I had a really good friend who was from Zimbabwe. and his mother was English, and he loved triathlon. He came over to England to train in the summer. And just as I was finishing school, my A levels, so finishing high school, he said, "Oh, why don't you come to Zimbabwe for the summer?" And I knew it was at altitude, and I knew altitude training worked for me because I trained at outdoors already, and I had some good success. So the year I finished school, I finished all my exams, took a gap year, so didn't go to university. Kind of took a year to travel. And I told my mum and dad, this is 1996. I said, "Oh, I'm going to Zimbabwe for 8 months to train." And they said, "Oh, well, how are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, Robin's going to pick me up at the airport." I faxed in my flight details, and I just went with it. And I think that was a real kind of like stepping off the edge of the cliff and seeing what would happen. And yeah, I just fell in love with the sport. I had an amazing summer in Zimbabwe. I went back the next year and brought 4 other British athletes, international athletes, with me, so we could get a really good training camp in. And yes, it was the races. The year after, off the back of that training, I was the world champion as a junior, which set me up. You need that step up to go into senior. But definitely, it was having that faith, that belief, that desire of intrigue, travel that definitely set me up.
That's great. I love that story because, you ask a lot of people and they think about their wins or they think about certain things. And for you, it was that travel. And I think that's great. Now, most people will, of course, be familiar with what happened to you in 2018. And, if you haven't seen The Man in the Halo, my listeners, you really should, because it's a 30-minute documentary. It's available on YouTube. And I think it gives such incredible insight to who Tim is as a person and his incredible ability to come back from such a devastating injury. So let's just talk briefly about that crash. I'm sure you're probably sick of talking about it, but to me, as an emergency physician, I'm watching the reports of this, and I see people with these kinds of injuries all the time, and usually they're not Instagramming from their hospital bed with a collar on, telling everybody how they just got hit by a truck and now have a broken neck. All I could think about at that time was how incredibly fortunate you were. And I'm sorry, the crash was 2017, correct? Yes, I got that wrong. I know it was 2017 because you came back in 2018, the year I was there. So in 2017 was the crash. And I remember watching your Instagramming from your hospital bed and just thinking in horror of what had happened to you and being incredibly concerned about what this could have meant, not for your athletic career, but just for your life. And you looked so at ease and so relaxed. And I'm just wondering, what did you really feel as you were lying there and trying to process all of this?
Well, I think at that moment in time, one word, and obviously being an emergency physician, you will really appreciate this. One word: morphine.
Yeah.
I'd literally probably about 13, because so when I got to the hospital, obviously I'm, in a little bit of pain, but it's actually more my shoulder that was sore, and I was worried I'd broken my collarbone. My knee was sore. My neck was, in a brace, but it's kind of one of those breaks that isn't, I'm not saying it's not painful, but it's kind of like it was all these other injuries that were definitely outweighing it. It's not that I wasn't worried. I didn't think, my neck was that serious. And I had a couple of scans, and they wanted me to go into for more scans. And I remember the last scan I had was, it was an MRI under contrast. So they injected it into this solution into my veins so they could see it going past, and then they MRI'd me. And when I went in, there were like 3 nurses. They slid me across onto the MRI table, did an amazing job, obviously, did the scan, and then they go through your headphones. Yeah, okay, you're coming out with. And when I was laying there with the brace on, and all of a sudden, about 400 people came into the room. Someone held my ankles, someone my kind of shin, my knee, my hip. I had all these people. All of a sudden, it was like, okay, we're going to move in together. And instead of being 3 or 4, there were literally 7 or 8 people. And then I realized, oh dear, this is obviously quite serious. And then when I got back in, they still couldn't tell me, because obviously the doctor had to tell me, not the nurses. So when they told me at that stage, I still hadn't had much pain meds because I was still thinking if I was going to race. That's how delusional I was. And obviously you can't race on certain medications. And at that stage, I kind of really, I don't know if hyperventilated, but I think it just hit me and I was like, and then everyone got really worried because as I was kind of like going like this, my body was moving. So they had to try and keep my chest still even more. They had to strap me down. And it was just, I guess, so then that's when I already had, a catheter in my arm.
An IV.
Just in case they needed to operate on me. So that's when they put the morphine in. And at this stage, rumour had got out that I'd been in a bike crash, that it was a bad one, it wasn't a bad one. Obviously, social media is what it is. My wife was in England. My Julie Dibbons, my coach at the time, and very, very good friends, and Franco, my manager, and very good friend, they were with me. They were obviously in communication with Kelly, and it's not that she didn't believe them, but, she's hearing what they're saying, and they don't know exactly because we don't know. And then she's reading stuff on social media. So they said, you need to do something. So I was very high on morphine, and I gave that message there and then on quite spontaneously.
That explains a lot. That really explains a lot.
That kind of process, I'm sure you've seen, the emotional highs and lows of someone that comes in with a trauma that they think it's okay, then they find out it's really bad, and then they get this euphoria of drugs and they think they're Superman. Oh, it's not that bad. Are you sure you're right? I'm fine. Really.
Of course.
So that's kind of like how that came out, and I didn't want to speak to Kelly, and I think that would have made it worse for me and definitely for her because she was in Boulder with with Matilda and Hugo. That's kind of like how that Instagram post came out. But it was a funny time because if I go to the doctors generally and the doctor and I've got a sore throat and the doctor says you've got strep throat, you need antibiotics, I'm not going to question him. I'm just going to go, okay, here's the prescription, go and get it. And it was the same. They told me what was wrong with me, and they told me this, and you're kind of like, it's that's what the experts say, and they've got the data to back it up. They've got the scans, so that's kind of like what you believe. So I was very practical at that stage. I realised I wasn't going to race. I realised I'd broken my neck. They weren't so sure because they weren't specialists how bad or how not bad it was. So I was still thinking, well, maybe I could race before Christmas. Arizona's always late and whatnot. Maybe I could go down to WA, try and qualify for Kona for next year. It wasn't really until I got back to Boulder and I saw Dr. V, the specialist, and he said, yes, this is actually quite a serious break and you have no idea how lucky you are for someone who's very unlucky. Because I was in a cycle lane and a car did turn in front of me.
So I want to ask two things. Number one is it's not clear to me as a medical professional. So just for people who are listening, C1 is a ring. C2 is a vertebrae that has it's called the dens that sticks up through C1. And the reason your head can turn is because the ring pivots around the dens. So fractures of C1 are very bad because the ring is broken and therefore you have dissociation from the spinal column. Fractures of C2 can be very bad because if the dens gets broken, depending on where the dens breaks, it causes severe instability of the spinal column. So do you know what kind of fracture you had? Because there are various types of fracture. You could fracture the dens, you could fracture the body of C2. I'm just curious, do you know which kind of fracture you had?
So it was the right lateral mass, and it was a fracture of the hangman bone. So
you had the hang. Okay. So for people who are listening, I'm describing this as I'm actually showing it. I video all of these, and I will put this up on the YouTube channel. But So a hangman's fracture is a fracture of the posterior elements of the C2, and it is considered an unstable fracture. And then the lateral mass, so the vertebra, and I'll put some images overlaying the video as I'm speaking from medical text so I can illustrate this better. But the lateral mass of the vertebrae gets fractured in conjunction with the hangman's fracture. It leads to an incredibly unstable fracture. And I'm guessing because Tim being as fit and strong as he was, when he had this fracture, his neck muscles basically went into some kind of spasm and basically protected his spine from moving too much and causing distraction, which would have impinged on the spinal column, his nervous, the spinal cord, and would have led to much more serious injury. So very fortunate, and thankfully so. And then comes back and gets this news that he has choices in terms of what kind of procedure to do, and decides to go ahead with halo fixation, which is the best way to return to get return of function, basically to allow the bones to heal. By, if you break an arm, you put your arm in a cast. If you break your neck, you can't put your neck in a cast. So the next best thing is to immobilize the head and the neck. And you do this by affixing this structure to your head in the form of a halo. Very uncomfortable, but it didn't even seem like it took you obviously the video shortens things, but how long did it take you to sort of consider the different things that you had as options?
Probably about 2 minutes, if that.
Really? It was that fast?
Yeah. I mean, I flew back from Kona with Pat McKenna, a really good friend of mine, who was out there to watch the race. So he missed that to fly back. And I think the way the doctor described it, he said you could absolutely have a fusion. He said later on you might have complications just because your everything moves individually.
Right.
And obviously by doing that, if I wanted to carry on to be an athlete, and then obviously just as I get older, do lots of stuff with my children, he said, you might need to have another operation. He said, if you want to get back to being a professional athlete or try, never guaranteed anything, try to become a professional athlete again. The best way to do it is a halo. And I said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And then I genuinely said, what is a halo? I mean, I bet your listeners, if they don't know who I am, haven't seen the documentary, I've never heard of a halo in terms of a medical term. It sounds pretty cool if you ask me.
Well, it's really interesting, Tim. When I started in medical school and going through residency, we used to see people in halos not infrequently because that was the way that most cervical spine fractures were managed. But as neurosurgery and spine surgery has become more and more advanced, it's not the way things are done. Now they go in and they fuse, and they use a lot of hardware to just because it's quicker, it's easier. People don't tolerate halos. They're not going to be like you were. They're not going to follow the physio. They're not going to be as diligent. And having that halo on is, well, you can attest to it. It's not very comfortable. Basically, it's a very bulky apparatus. You drill into the skull to basically fix this thing so that your head can't move and allow the bones to rest completely and so they can heal. But I was familiar with it, but yeah, none of my readers are going to be. And again, on the video, I'll post a picture from what Tim looked like when he was wearing his halo. And that's what it is. It just fixes your head so you can't move. And I think one of the most amazing scenes from that video was when they removed it and you just had, for the first time, you were able to just sort of twist, and you just, the joy, the relief on your face was wonderful to see.
I mean, it wasn't so much the neck. I mean, I think it was just the taut. I mean, literally from my belly button upwards, nothing could move.
Yeah.
It did its job. It was a plaster cast. It made the bone as stable. But you couldn't just isolate, C2. You had to isolate boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And, I mean, yeah.
Tim, you're such an affable, you're such an approach, and you share this characteristic with so many of your fellow triathlon pros. You're very approachable, you're very friendly, you're very genuine. And I wonder, do you think that after the injury, you're even more so? Or do you think you're the same person, but just more people are aware of you now because of the story?
I think outside our sport, more people are aware of me, especially, initially, as you said, 2018, 2019. But no, I mean, I think, I've always appreciated the sport. I've been in this kind of like world, from before it was an Olympic sport, before 70.3 racing really existed. I remember, wanting to race Pig Power and, Kenny Sues and all the old school boys. So I think I've always been like that, but I always take time to speak to people with a love of, if someone supports, the Broncos, I'm going to go and chat to them if I support the Broncos. And for me, triathlon. That's kind of like, how it is for me. But yeah, I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm just a speck, that makes up the rich tapestry of triathlon.